for this honor of inviting me to share today with you. The last time Pat Heller introduced me at an event, they rolled out a 3-layer cake and she jumped out of it. So I was a little apprehensive when they told me she was doing the introduction. Let me just say, first on behalf of all of us at St. Rose, thanks to each and every one of you for your incredible support right from the moment this happened on December 14th. We never could have done what we did without the support of the Diocese of Bridgeport and all of our brother and sister parishes. You were remarkable, and we have evidence of that in piles and piles and piles of cards and letters and posters and prayer chains. I want you to know the donations that were sent to us, totally unsolicited and totally not recommended by the diocese, just came from concerts and from dress-down days in the schools. Confirmation classes really reached out to us. So I want to say thank you because it really made a difference and continues to make a difference. And I thank you for standing with us, not beside us, but standing with us. Because no one can ever do any of these things alone without each other and without the Lord as our foundation. There are many people here who made that day happen as well in terms of getting us off to the place we had to go, and that was all the parishioners of St. Rose. So I'd like to ask everybody from Team Newtown to stand up. And I particularly want to thank our staff. This was a situation where you had to step out of the classroom. This was, did you learn it or not? Can you use it or not? And our staff can be very proud of what they've taught our parishioners in that classroom, because we certainly did what we had to do as best we could. It was an extraordinarily beautiful day in mid-December. It had taken the 8th grade to New York the day before. We'd done all the things you do when you go to New York with kids. We had gone to St. Patrick's, we went to the Christmas show at Radio City, we had lunch, we went ice skating at Central Park. And then we came home on the train where they were extremely rowdy, and we told them they were from St. Mary's in Bethel. For me, it was going to be a day when I got up, and I had felt really good. I'm a Christmas kind of guy, and I just mailed out my cards, I shipped my packages. All I had left to do was wrap some presents, and I was going to spend the day in the attic doing that. And all of a sudden, the call came in that schools were put on lockdown. I went immediately over to church where our students were attending our usual Friday Mass at 9 o'clock, and communion had just finished, and I said, we have to stop Mass, we have to leave the church, we have to go back to school. We were on lockdown. And we started dismissing the students, and they started leaving the church, and then we realized this was not a safe thing to do, because another call came in and said there was another shooter. There were, in fact, bands of shooters. We didn't know what the truth was. So we brought them back into the church. We had a baptism, actually, of a student in our school who wanted to become a Catholic, even though his parents were not. And so we decided to move ahead with the baptism, hoping that would distract some of the children from their anxiety and their upsetment. And then we got this third call. You're really on lockdown. And of course, Pam, in all of her wisdom, got up in the pulpit and started praying the rosary. Now, during lockdown, you're supposed to be silent. That's very hard for Pam. But we were all kind of grabbing at straws, trying to figure out, what are we supposed to do? How are we going to keep this church full of children safe? And so one by one, class by class, we got them back to the school. I can't tell you the whole series of events that went on that day would take hours. But the call came in finally from the facilities manager to me and said, Father Bob, I think you better get down here. It's really bad. And so Father Luke and Father Ignazio and I jumped in the car and drove down to Sandy Hook School. Father Luke and Father Ignazio went to the firehouse. I went down the driveway to the school. I was met by an FBI agent and said, I think you better come walk with me. When I got to the door of the school, I was asked by one of the police officers to go in and say a prayer. He told me there were no survivors. He told me that it was carnage. And I said to myself, there's no way I can walk into the school. These children are already with the Lord. And so I stood there and prayed. I could still hear that sound of the breaking glass in that front window under my feet as I stood there. But I decided I had to go back to be where I could be more help, and that was in the firehouse. That's where they had assembled the children. And I would tell you the real heroes of that day were the teachers. I saw all the personnel with guns and ambulances and fire trucks. It was those teachers trying to bring those children a sense of security and peace in the bays of the firehouse. And I felt this little girl put her finger in my back belt loop and just held on to me. I had all these children calling out my name, Father Bob, Father Bob. They knew something was not right if I was standing in the firehouse in their midst. And so we got them in line with their teachers, their names were called, and one by one their parents were taking them by the hand out of the firehouse. And then there was that group of parents who stood in the back, whose children didn't respond here. And they were asked to go into a back room and just wait. You know, there was a lot of hope because there were a lot of stories going on that day. The children had run into the woods, that some children had run to the police station, that some had been taken to the hospital. So people were on their cell phones calling anybody they could, trying to find them. And as the day went on, and as hours went on, our governor finally came in at 3 o'clock to have to share with them the news. There were no survivors. Now that period from 12 to 3 was very much like Good Friday. The parallels were incredible. Here were these mothers weeping at the foot of a cross after their children had been brutalized and murdered. Emotion beyond belief. We had been told by the police that if we could stay, it would be help, and to try to get the other clergy there. And so Father Luke called our secretary, and luckily we were organized enough that we had email addresses, and within a half hour, all the clergy were there. Each went to a family, whether they knew them or not. At first, to me, they were all kind of anonymous people standing against that wall, but when I came into that back room, I started realizing these were the people from St. Rose. And I started counting 1, 2, 6, 7, 9, 10. I thought to myself, oh my goodness, these are not anonymous people. These are parishioners. These are children who went to our preschool, children who were registered in our religious education program, parents whom I had married, children who I baptized. There was no anonymity in that room. I even had my little Saturday morning diner buddy there, a little guy that used to take more whipped cream than hot chocolate. And so there we were. That was the reality. You've heard the story. You saw the story. We keep hearing about the story. But what do we do? What do we do? And I think as we left that firehouse, and Father Luke and I waited there until the last family left. One father stayed behind, one husband stayed behind. We went to the car. Of course, we were swarmed by reporters. What was going on? They had already heard the news. There were no survivors, but they too were confused and overwhelmed. I couldn't believe how media had amassed that quickly in a matter of hours from all over the world to cover a story about Newtown, a place where things like this don't happen. And I went outside at that point because the sisters of one of the teachers was still screaming down the driveway, waiting for her sister to walk out. I had to try the best I could with police assistance to bring her back to her car and help her get home. You know, when you see the ambulances, and there were several just leaving empty, when you saw the military and the state police, local police walking away, the barrels of their gun pointed down, looking so discouraged, you could fall into a tremendous amount of hopelessness. And I knew that's not a place we could go. It wouldn't be the place to be. And as I saw those faces, Jen and Sandy, Jeff, Scarlett, Neil and Mike, these mothers, these fathers, these husbands, I realized there had to be a reason for this. And never once, in all of those hours, did anyone say to me, why did God let this happen? Never once. It was clear that this was evil. It was clear that for a few moments darkness had covered our land, but it was very quickly realized that goodness would overcome that evil, that light would overcome that darkness, And that became the mantra of those days. We were walking in light and in hope, and we were not going to be destroyed. You know, the story goes on and on and on. There's so many parts to it. When I finally got back to church at 5 o'clock and decided to have a mass that evening, I really wasn't sure what to expect, but the church was already filled at 5 o'clock. Already filled. People were lighting candles. You'll have to excuse me, this still gets to me very deeply, so just bear with me, please. You know, I thought to myself, I don't even know what I'm going to say, and I knew I had to put myself in God's hands at that point. And 10 minutes before the service started, I got a call that the governor was going to be there, that both United States senators were coming to the service, that our local politicians are going to be there. This was becoming bigger than I ever expected. What was I going to say? I really didn't know. All I knew was, as I looked, and I'm sorry I should have gotten this blown up for you, but this was our picture of our church that night. There were over 2,000 people because people needed a place to be. And where did they turn? They turned to the churches. And this light is not artificial. This is the light of hundreds of candles of people standing outside this church. We opened the windows so people could look inside. We opened the doors so people could stand at the entryways. It was an incredible outpouring because people knew that's where they had to be. And so, like the bishop said, I could only think of one theme, and that was love, because that's what I witnessed that day. I saw the love that you don't experience in an everyday life until something so important is ripped right out of you, your heart. And that's what I saw in these parents. It was love. Love in its best sense, love in its most challenging sense. And it was Christ. That's why they came to the church. There was light. There was hope. There was hugging. There was, you're not alone. We can do this because we have the Lord. And we held tight to the foot of the cross because we knew that was our only hope and our safety and our salvation. After Mass, we were asked to go with the police to visit each of the families and to confirm that their loved one had in fact died. You can imagine ringing a doorbell at midnight with a police officer and a grief counselor being welcomed into a home by people I'm sure never want to open that door, and sitting down and saying, it's true. It's true. Next day, I don't remember too much except we were overwhelmed by media. People were in and out of the church. I can remember this though. When I came home around 3 o'clock, I pulled into our drive and I saw 2 vans load of young people. I was a little nervous. We left our church open 24/7 those days. I thought, I hope they weren't out partying and they were coming down here to be rallying. I walked into church and there they were in the first 2 pews. Brain roast. They were St. Rose School graduates in college. And they were back in their church on their knees at 3 in the morning praying the rosary. They got it. They got it. So if you ever doubt your effectiveness, they get it. I went home and I said to the Lord, you know what? I'm tired. I had to be up at 4:30 to speak to someone. You can't imagine the phone. It rang all night. And in those days, we didn't know what else might be happening, so we felt compelled to answer the phone. All night, for days, the phone rang. But I turned on the TV and I thought for sure White Christmas would be on, or one of those Christmas movies that would just kind of lift my spirits, and it turned out to be Carousel. And it happened right at the moment they were singing, You'll Never Walk Alone. I said, thank you. Thank you. You know, when your dreams are tossed and turned, when you're in the storm, walk on with hope in your heart. Amazing. God hears prayers. And so I carried that as my personal mantra, because the next day I realized we have to get moving and be with these families. However, finish what he started, and you were his next target. Once again, we had to interrupt Mass and ask hundreds of people who already were afraid to leave and to go home. And I thought to myself at that point, what is safe? What is safe for us? These home invasions, our schools, and now our churches. What's happening to us? But you won't be alone. I knew that. And even though the SWAT team was running through the church, and I will say, when the bishop was talking about his parents, my mother raised me to always make sure that you picked up your clothes and you made your bed before you left your room. That was the one day I didn't. And of course, it would be a female officer with a dog going through my room, sniffing my personals. That was on that list of traumas for me too. You have to go on. And so the next morning we gathered our staff together and we went out just like Jesus told us to do, 2 by 2, each to a home to plan a funeral. Can you imagine how difficult that must have been for our staff to go knock on a door? And so, we're here to plan your child's funeral. But you know what? Those people gave us the strength to do that. They welcomed us in, and they sat down, and they opened their hearts to our staff. And they planned the most beautiful liturgies you can imagine. I said to the staff, they can have anything they want. I don't care if I was the Pope himself on the liturgy. The 8 mothers got up and gave their own child's eulogy. And not by coincidence, they all chose the same gospel. Let the children come to me. Because they believed in their hearts that these 20 children went off to the Lord hand in hand and were in heaven. There was no doubt in their eyes, and that they were happy. Now that's faith. That's faith. That's light and darkness. That's goodness overcoming evil. That night, of course, we also had the interfaith service with the president. And I said to myself, this is pretty amazing, that we're having an imam and a rabbi walking up to a stage with their arm around each other. That we have people who come from different traditions bound together. Because you know what? It was all about peace. It was about reconciliation. It was about justice. It was about not forgetting. And sometimes we forget what unites us. Someone asked me yesterday if I could teach a course in the seminary after this, what would it be? I'd say the importance of inclusion. It's a different world we're living in now. Catholics just don't marry Catholics anymore. We need to be open to each other. I learned from this that nothing happens by coincidence. 3 years ago, we decided to recreate our clergy. There were a lot of changes in town. And we went the traditional route of ecumenical until we realized that we now have a Buddhist monastery. We also have a Muslim community. We have a temple. And so we went the route of interfaith. And it helped us be prepared for this day and to stand in this community as witnesses to one God and to one truth. That's important in this society today. When we go through all of these things, there are several things I learned. One is, why didn't they ask why God did this? I couldn't figure it out. Why didn't they ask that? People were asking me that all the time. Not these families. I thought to myself, because this was something precious, and they knew that God loved these children, and He would never have harmed them. They spoke a message to the world that isn't often heard. We're so good at blaming, always looking for somebody to blame, even God Himself. They saw this for what it was, an evil action by a young man with issues. I often think to myself, because Adam went to our school for a while, that when he got to that light in Sandy Hook, he could have turned right or he could have turned left. Every time I go to that traffic light, that's all I think about. He chose to go right to Sandy Hook School. It's amazing what you go through when you have an experience like this. Why that day while I was at the firehouse, one of my parishioners was at the school, and he looked up in the sky and he saw this cloud formation of a cross right over our school. This was at 10:38, an hour after the shootings. First I thought to myself, this is a sign of God's protection. And I lived with that for weeks, until one of the visionaries in Msgr came to our church. And I was sitting there listening to him, and I realized this was also a burden that Christ put on us to carry this cross. And how are we going to carry it with as much dignity as Christ did? It's become a challenge for us as a faith community. We know that God's hand was not in it, but God's hand is in it, because he wants us to show the world how important it is to have faith and trust and hope, all those things the bishop spoke about. I learned too that light over darkness is something all of us have to conquer. I remember the week before I was ordained a priest, we were on retreat, and our retreat master said, remember, John, Jesus only hung on the cross for 3 hours. And then he was taken down and he rose. And some of us hold on to these things, these hurts in life for years, and we never get to the resurrection. I'll tell you, if anyone celebrates funerals more beautifully, it's the Catholic Church. Because we begin with the beginning, with our baptism, the promise of resurrection. And through scriptures, and through Eucharist, and through that commendation, we go home to the Lord. It's a beautiful, rich liturgy. It's always the light of Christ overcoming the darkness. I also learned in this that there's no such thing as coincidence, that there is a plan for everything. I can't tell you how many times that has come home to me. Just in the formation of our clergy teams. There was no coincidence all these things were happening. There was all part of the plan, the vision. I also realized that core values emerge really quickly when it's important to let them emerge. We saw families coming back, as the bishop suggested today. We saw mothers and fathers together again. We actually saw people that chose only one activity for their child, rather than running from soccer to cheerleading and football. We saw changes because we saw families coming back together and appreciating each other and realizing how quickly the family can be changed. I remember one of the mothers just saying to me recently, I've chosen to get very quiet because I'm trying to figure out how to turn my family of 4 into a family of 3. Family was everything. I also learned that this was one of the most pro-life platforms I could have had. I think our Holy Father's calling us to go beyond certain issues into the broader issues. What's broader than this? The taking of 26 innocent lives by violence. If that's not a pro-life issue, I don't know what is. But we never talk about it. I was just with a mother the other day whose son is dealing with so much issue in his life guilt. And he said, no one's ever talked to us about hell and evil anymore. We don't kind of teach that. And I think when we look at our programs, not that we want to go back to the days when we were scared to death, but do we ever talk about that? Do we ever talk about hell as real? Do we ever talk about what evil really is? Do we ever talk about how destructive the power of evil is? This caught so many people off guard because they never really thought about it. She even said, as a mother, I never thought to bring this up to my child. And we have to look sometimes at what we are teaching or what we're failing to teach, because that is our theology. That is our tradition. Certainly mental health, one of the most neglected areas in our society. So many people are suffering unnecessarily. I just spoke at a breakfast on Thursday. It's just horrible to hear that, sure, your insurance, you can have 6 sessions, get better. Well, really, if you can't afford the copay, just take this medication, you'll feel fine. That's not the answer. The answer is reaching out your heart to each other. Mental health is an issue for this country. We are so stressed right now as Americans. You can't even travel and have that sense of security anymore. What is safe? And it's creating so many issues for us over and over and over again. Certainly that attitude, it can't happen here. Yes, it can. It can happen anywhere. Because we have desensitized our young people to violence. We haven't succeeded at that. Have you noticed that they've even started changing the movie codes from what used to be 17 down to 13? We had a parish, the Sunday after this happened, the priest called me up and said, I did something I never thought I'd do. I went and I challenged every parent in that church. I went out and bought a video game for their child for Christmas to look at it and see what it's about. And if it even touches on violence, to bring it back. And then to give the money to Sandy Hook. We received $18,171 in that parish. Do you as a grandparent know what your grandchild's asking for when you go to buy a video game? We're put it in their hands. We put it in their hands. And they become so desensitized to it because it surrounds them. I think we have to learn from so many things that happened that day. You know, recently, Pam and Mary, our principal, and I spoke at an NCA conference. You know, Mary shared so much about what's going on in the school that day. Sister Thaddeus had taught many of these children when they were in pre-K at St. Rose. And Mary, of course, had some of them in kindergarten before they transferred over to public school. You know, the teachers were not wearing shoes for days. They were wearing sneakers in case they had to run fast. Every time a book dropped, somebody jumped. Every time a door slammed. I even find myself now when I'm in church, if I see something bloody strange coming in, I'm so focused on that person, wondering what they're doing there. You know, it takes on a life of its own. And we have to work so hard to try to get past that and try to keep the hope and the faith that we have. You know, as we go through all of these things, we realize that for us, privacy is no longer. That the lives of these families have been changed, that these children now belong to the world, that we're a town that's broken and grief-filled, and that we're a town that's becoming divided. There's still lots of hugs in Newtown. People are still saying thanks. But we're becoming divided because grief takes us in all different directions. You know, we can't paint a pretty picture after this because there isn't a pretty picture. And we know that some of the families have chosen one route to honor their child, others have chosen quite a different one. But at least they're respecting each other and their division and their diversity. I think probably the one advice I would give to any minister is never be part of the United Way distribution fund in their life. You know, I was asked to be part of that because they thought faith was such an integral part of this whole experience. They wanted a person that represented faith to be on this. Money is tough. Money is tough. And it brought out so much negativity and so much hurt. But you know, that's what we seem to do as Americans, isn't it? We have to do something. You know, when things like this happen in other countries, they kind of just sit in silence. But in America, we got to keep doing things. You know, I feel the second heroes were the postal workers. I remember the day after Christmas, almost everybody on staff was gone, and the post office called me and said, I think you better come down here. And I walked in, and there had to be, without exaggeration, 300,000 pieces of mail and packages for St. Rose. You know, thanks be to God for the generous spirit of people who gave up their Christmas vacation to come in and to start processing and opening those things. Remember, too, that they first all had to be checked out by the SWAT team because of the threats that were continuing. We also have the issue of the hoax, which really has drained us of a lot of energy because we have people that still call us this day. I had one call me recently, asked me to get a camera, go down, dig up one of the children's caskets, open the casket, and take a picture for him. You don't think there's mental health issues in this world? It's amazing what this has brought out of humanity. But it's also amazing what is interjected into humanity. You know, probably the one question I'm asked more than anybody right now is, how's everybody doing? That's the one question I've learned not to ask anybody. How are you doing? Because you want to say, how do you think they're doing? How do you think they're doing? This impacted a whole community. It certainly impacted these families more than anyone. You know, my answer is a simple one, that we're on a journey to healing, but we're all on very different paths. Some are still frozen in the time of December 14th. They just can't get past it. Some are deeply rooted in traumatic stress. Some have taken just baby steps trying to do everything they can to restore, to recreate, to refashion. But some would take a giant leap. Some of our families are doing incredible things to honor their children. They're putting their energy in positive decision making. They're doing wonderful things for the world. We have one family helping a group in Africa. We have another that's going around trying to improve safety for schools. Great things. But it's up to every person what they want to do with this. You know, I know myself, I certainly am suffering from post-traumatic stress. I haven't slept a full night since this happened. I still hear that sound of that glass under my feet. You know, I've had a lot of issues. My blood pressure went through the ceiling. I'm now taking water pills, which is why I have to end this in a few minutes. But we are stressed and we are grieved. You know, we're seeing an increase of domestic violence. We're seeing adults arguing with each other. We're seeing an increase in addictive behaviors and alcohol, prescription drugs, street drugs, gambling. We're seeing marital issues emerging, one after another. We're seeing family systems being challenged. We're seeing aggressive behavior. Mary told me just in one day last week in our school, there were 40 children who were brought to the nurse for aggressive behaviors, pushing each other, tripping each other. The stress is real. There's depression, and there's anxiety, and there's fear. All part of the human condition. But there's also faith. There is still faith. You know, 1214 was a direct cause of some of these behaviors, but it was more of a catalyst for servicing things that were never resolved in people's lives. And that's where we have to go. We push too many things aside, and we don't take care of them. We need to take care of them. And then when things like this happen, they emerge, and who can help us? You know, we need to pay attention to ourselves. We need to stop suppressing our hurts. We need to heal. And if we're going to learn how to love, as the bishop suggests, it seems to me Jesus said you have to learn how to forgive first. And everybody's looking for somebody to blame for this. Everybody's looking. Adam's mother. She should never have had all those guns in the house. Who's to judge? Who is to be the judge? But we're good at that. Let's look for somebody to blame. Why don't we take responsibility for ourselves? We created this culture. We allow this culture to continue to be recreated. We need, as the bishop said, to stand firm in the faith. Not just to stand in front of a classroom, but stand in the classroom of the world and continue to teach and witness to the value of Jesus Christ. How many of our children who were given Catholic education or raised in religious ed programs have turned away from the Eucharist? Why? Why? Why have we allowed that to happen? I want to get involved in that. I don't want to nag them. I have a nice relationship with my daughter-in-law. I don't want to get her upset. Get her upset. You know, I wonder if anybody sits at the dinner table, as the bishop suggests, and talks about your salvation. I had a mother come to me a couple of years ago. This made such a deep impact on me. I never forgot. She said, you know what, Father? I have 4 boys, and I'm convinced they're all going to hell. I'm convinced, she said. She said, I did the best I could. I did the best I could, but they had no use for God or the church. That's on them, she said. Can you imagine a mother, though? We can laugh at that, but that's her fear. She comes to church daily, on her knees, and prays for these 4 boys. What happened? What has happened? You know, we keep allowing these things to go on in life today. When are we going to be strong enough to stand up and say, enough? You know, I don't know if we challenge our children very much with things of faith. You know, we want to keep everything nice. I had a parent just did 2 nights ago. Her daughter was acting out terribly as a 16-year-old. She said, my younger daughter goes to religious ed, but all I keep telling her is that Jesus is love. My daughter has deeper questions than that. I wonder if we ever really thought about how we're challenging. Because to me, the biggest concern after this incident is in that age group of 7th, 8th, and 9th graders. They have the serious questions. They're deciding in confirmation whether or not they really want to live this life. They have serious, deep questions. And we have to be able to answer them to the best of our ability. Because they are the ones asking, if God is so good, why do things like this happen?
They're the ones asking that question before they start making their life choices. We have to pay attention to that. I still recall that day, and I think we always will, those of us who were immersed in it. Yesterday, our first selectman said to me, "Bob, what the world doesn't realize is that the world had a tragedy on December 14th, but Newtown has a tragedy December 15th, December 16th, November 11th, November 12th. Every day is a tragedy for us. It just doesn't go away. And as this first anniversary gets closer, it's even more higher awareness in our lives. We know good conquered evil. There was no doubt. Thanks be to people like you. We know that light overcame the darkness. It was apparent. We know the horrible story of December 14th. And we know that people from all around the world came together to pray for us and to bring hope to a broken community. Pam shared at her talk recently that she received an email from a parish in Ireland that said, "While you're sleeping, we're awake praying for you." Isn't it good to be part of a universal church? The priest in Scotland, Dunblane, where his shooting took place 17 years ago, has been in touch with me every day. He said, nobody was able to reach out to me because nobody had been through this experience before. I'm going to be here for you. In fact, he's coming to spend the anniversary with us at 81 years old, the week before Christmas. He's coming to St. Rose to stand by my side. That's the church. That's the church that we are part of. That's the church we have to preserve. That's the church we have to excite people about. People don't hear enough of these stories about the goodness of the church. They featured Newtown in the recent copy of Vanity Fair. I don't know if you saw that article. But prior to that article was about what? The sex scandals in the Vatican. I was on page 133. I'm on page 162. It's weird. It's weird. But that's the church we have to focus on, isn't it? The church is human. It has divine origins, but we're humans trying to make the most of it. We all, I think, realize that if there was going to be peace, it was only going to come from the hand of God. If the unsettled hearts of our community, if the disrupted lives were ever going to be healed, it had to come from the hand of God. If we were going to have hope to get up this morning and stand here and do this, to get up and to dress our children for school, to get up and tell our husbands and wives we love them, we had to do it only because we had a hope in God that He was going to see us through that day. Faith has been an integral part of this community since the day we were faced with this tragedy, and there has been an increase of people in church. We've added another Mass, actually, at St. Rose on Sunday night. It's made a big difference in the lives of families who now have Sunday morning free to do other activities and still have time to come together to church. Families are coming together in prayer. We have many families, as you know, who are leaving Newtown for this anniversary. I've been asked to put together prayer services they could take with them so that they could pray in honor of these children that day. Amazing. Prayer works. Our religious communities in Newtown have really been challenged as well. We have met often and prayed together often. I get so confused, however, at these interfaith services. I always have to think, can you say Jesus or not today? There's one kind of downside to interfaith because you're never quite sure. In fact, on December 14th, I'm hosting a dinner for all the clergy, and I was fine until yesterday when this one said, well, we don't eat this, and I don't drink this, and you have to have this. This is going to be a real challenge, just having an interfaith dinner. You can imagine the greater challenge of having interfaith services, trying to bring people together. But it's worth it. It's worth it because we were the ones who've been asked to go bless the playgrounds being built for these children. We're the ones asked to go to fundraisers that are honoring their loved ones. They always want a prayer. I was asked to go to Sandy Hook School the day that they demolished the 2 classrooms where the children were killed. That was horrible. But the families wanted someone there to pray as those 2 rooms went to the earth. We can't do it alone. So we're experiencing all the stages of grief, denial, bargaining, anger, hopefully we'll get to that day of acceptance. But as people of faith, we're also experiencing a hope that one day there will be peace. That one day violence will disappear. And that perhaps we can really live the Beatitudes that Jesus intended them. We live in the hope that after the great suffering, after our crucifixion, there will be resurrection. We're praying that every human being will be respected and revered, and that we embrace every human being's life as a precious gift from God. We live as people in a hope that is unbounded, and we trust in the source of all healing and forgiveness. You know, we've had therapy dogs, we even have therapy donkeys, we've had therapy. I remember the Saturday, I looked out and there was these Marines there with plastic bags. I'm thinking, what are the Marines doing here? They were distributing teddy bears to the children going into church. You know, those children held those things so tightly all during Mass. You know, we have received so much. We had a woman call us from Louisiana who had Jesus and Mary dolls. And I said to Pam, "You're kidding, right? Are these like, Barbie dolls dressed up like Barbie and Ken?" I didn't know. We have received many different things. I will share that with you. In fact, if you ever like the experience, you can come to our basement at any time. But these dolls, we decided to give them to the children for their first Holy Communion. And they're 24 inches. They're plush. I know, be jealous. And it's Mary and Jesus, the Good Shepherd. And when you lift up their little robes, you see a red heart embroidered there. Really, really nice. And I thought to myself, it's a little much. However, a 7-8-year-old boy is going to want a little plush Jesus doll. But First Communion, because again, they were so close to the situation, these women actually came up from Louisiana, and we had them in wagons, and we wheeled them at the end of Communion Mass through the church and gave each child a doll. They were still hugging them. And every mother was like in horror because the lint from these dolls were not on their stomachs. But they were hugging them, and they're still hugging them. They're taking them to sleepovers. They're taking them to Grandma's house. They need something to hold on to. And look what we have to hold on to when we have our faith. Mother told me recently that she has had it with her child. He's 8 years old. And you probably know San Diego School every day is being visited by somebody, being given something. And they were given an extended vacation period. And this little boy just kept saying, "What are we going to do next? What are we going to do next? What are we going to do next?" She actually took him to the mall, dropped him off, and left him. We're talking stress. But you know what? We can't afford to do that to anybody under any circumstances. We can never leave someone alone. We look at these little kids. We have so many lessons to learn from them. So many lessons to learn from them. I keep thinking about little Katie, who just put her finger up and this butterfly landed on it. And now there's going to be a whole animal preserve in her memory. Just because she put up her finger and God sent her a butterfly. We have little Joey, a nonverbal autistic child, who on Sunday would like to trace the cross on our vestments. She couldn't talk, but she would always take her index finger and trace the cross on our vestments. She taught us that you don't have to talk. Pam told me this story about little Joey. She said her sister came and said, "You know what? I know why God took Joey, because she was God's secret spy." And she was watching the world, and she couldn't talk or tell anybody anything. And God finally wanted the information she collected. What a teaching that is. There's little Freddie, who Father Luke and I were asked by his mother to tell him that his sister had died. He was in the firehouse, the only child there. When we sat down with him, he said, "I lost my best friend. I have nobody to play with anymore." I said, "Freddie, you're going to have so many friends." He said, "Yeah, but they're not my sister. That's a friend." Man, is that a lesson in family or what? There was
little boy that wanted to be a firefighter, Danny. I don't know where all these firefighters came from the morning of his funeral, but Churchill Road was lined with thousands of them. Here's a little boy, at 7, who wanted to do something good for society. You know, we had Caroline, who the Christmas before, we were taking our toy collection, she brought me her piggy bank. And her grandparents are pretty well off, so I figured there was something good in this piggy bank. And she said, I don't know how much is in here. 5 years old, but I want you to buy toys. Now she has a whole toy closet for the community in her honor. Is that a lesson in generosity and love? I think the most powerful one was the night when the children were left in the church after their wakes, guarded by police before their funerals the next day. And I walked in and I saw a police officer reading a story to this child. And he said, because I know that's what their mom and dad would be doing right now. So this is a tragedy, but it's a story of faith. It's a story of love. Listen, I keep hearing, you got to have the right person at the right place at the right time. If you have the Lord Jesus in your life, you are the right person. And you can always be in the right place at the right time. None of us claim to be experts in what happened in Newtown. We just put our trust, our faith in the Lord, and did our best to try to bring His love to very broken and hurt people. I guess that song from Carousel, 2,000 years after Jesus, He got it. Because you'll never walk alone. Walk on through the storm. And don't be afraid.